One important and effective way to challenge the anti-woke crusade is by returning to what wakefulness actually means. Awareness, honesty, and values-based living. What's ironic and somewhat disturbing is the ferocity with which conservative Christians attack the very consciousness their scriptures call for. What they don't seem to understand is that being woke isn't political, it's human. And it's commanded of them by the scriptures they claim to follow. If we want to grow and thrive, we need to stop sleepwalking through inherited beliefs and start living our lives with intention. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper into something that came up during the main episode. All right, let's take a deep breath and settle in because the readings we covered in this week's main episode give us a perfect setup for a conversation we really need to have. Advent begins with this call to wake up, to pay attention, to stop drifting through life as if we have all the time in the world. And it's almost laughable, that the same Christian groups who shout the loudest about defending the Bible are the ones most aggressively fighting against the very idea of being awake. They've built an entire movement around attacking the word woke. They treat it like it's some kind of dangerous moral virus. And yet, the scriptures they claim to believe urge people to do exactly that. Wake up. So tonight, in this episode of Afterthoughts, I want to name the hypocrisy. I want to take a careful, values-based look at why the anti-woke crusade is not only intellectually dishonest, it is spiritually and religiously dishonest. I want to explore why wakefulness has always been a core part of human growth, moral development, and yes, even Christianity. And I want to end by talking about how we move forward with clarity and purpose instead of getting dragged into the mud by people who are proudly, aggressively, performatively asleep. So, let's dive into that in this episode of Afterthoughts. Before anything else, let's talk about the word itself. Woke. Woke didn't come from academia or TikTok or progressive think tanks. It actually came from what is called African American Vernacular English, which is a dialect of English with its own grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. Now, your hillbilly relatives might say, well, them black folk don't know how to speak no good English, because most Americans fail to understand that languages, even the English language, do have dialects. Anyway, long before conservatives started throwing it around like some sort of insult, the term woke meant be aware, stay alert, don't be naive about injustice, pay attention to the world around you. That's it. It was a warning, a survival strategy. Being woke was a call to consciousness. Now, fast forward a few decades. The same people who insist they're defending Judeo-Christian values have turned woke into a catch-all insult for anything they don't like. Books, teachers, LGBTQ folks, equity programs, history, feminism, science, empathy, facts, basically anything that might challenge their worldview. They label it as woke and dismiss it. They don't have to engage with people or ideas they don't like. They simply label and dismiss. But here's the question I want to ask, and this is the heart of tonight's conversation. If woke means awake and aware, then what does that make the people who oppose it? Because the opposite of woke is not conservative. The opposite of woke is asleep, unconscious, unaware. And that is exactly what Paul warned against in our second reading from this week. Wake from your slumber. Paul was telling people who wanted to follow the teachings of Jesus that they needed to open their frickin' eyes and see the world as it really is. They need to pay attention and be ready for anything. If you claim to follow the teachings of the Bible, and more specifically the teachings of Jesus, and your entire identity is built on rejecting wakefulness, then something is deeply, deeply wrong. Let's take a look at the political piece for a moment, because this is where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. The fact is that conservatives don't misinterpret the word woke. They intentionally distort it. Of course, they've never truly offered a clear definition of what they mean when they say woke, which is part of their strategy. If they don't offer a clear definition, we can't point out why they're wrong. It's intentionally vague and squishy, which makes it easier for them to paint it as some sort of evil, unfair boogeyman concept. The point is that they've done this on purpose. You see, it's much easier to dismiss ideas you don't like if you can just slap a scary label on them. Oh, that's woke. End of discussion. No nuance explored, no facts discussed, no engagement at all with the people or the issue, just label and dismiss. Conversation over. Now, this rather deceitful rhetorical move allows conservatives to do a number of things. First and foremost, they can avoid debating actual policies. They know that progressive ideas poll extremely well with their conservative voters when those voters just hear the ideas without a label attached to them. For example, polls showed that conservative voters love the Affordable Care Act, but they hate Obamacare and want to get rid of it. They don't realize that Obamacare is the conservative label for the Affordable Care Act. Labeling something as woke allows them to ignore real inequalities and makes it easier for them to shut down feelings of empathy. It also silences questions because, well, it's woke, so what's there to discuss? In other words, labeling something or someone as woke and then dismissing it blocks progress because it allows conservatives to completely avoid any sort of interaction with new ideas or any sort of significant self-reflection. At that point, it's not about living in alignment with their values. It's simply about dismissing anything that challenges their opinions and their current worldview. Labeling something as woke isn't an argument. It's a shortcut, a lazy one, designed to keep them from having to confront uncomfortable truths. But here's where it becomes even more ironic. These same groups scream about cancel culture, accusing leftist liberals of canceling everyone and everything. But what do? They cancel books. They cancel school curricula. Hell, they cancel history. They cancel companies. They cancel funding for research. They cancel entire federal agencies. They cancel comedians. They cancel reporters. Hell, they cancel people for simply daring to exist. And they do it all while insisting, oh, they're the victims. Oh, they're the oppressed ones. They're the ones being silenced. Meanwhile, if someone makes fun of Donald Trump on late-night TV, he throws a temper tantrum that would embarrass a toddler at Walmart. And yet, progressives are the snowflakes? Oh, come on. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's projection, but it's also unconsciousness. Their scriptures tell them to wake from their slumber, but these people are sleeping so deeply that they can't recognize their own behavior, even as they condemn others for doing far less. Okay, now let's bring this back to the so-called spiritual or religious dimension, because this is very important. If you remove the politics and look at the teachings of Jesus, whether you see him as historical, mythical, or somewhere in between, his message wasn't about domination, hierarchy, or cultural control. It certainly wasn't about policing people's identity, and definitely not about legislating morality. Whether he was real or myth, the teachings of Jesus, as represented in the Christian Bible, were rooted in things like compassion, fairness, inclusion, justice, humility, protecting the vulnerable. Jesus not only welcomed outsiders, he looked for them. What he did was the original diversity, equity, and inclusion program. He challenged religious authorities. He rejected purity culture. And a culture that said, oh, you have to follow all of our rules to prove that you're worthy. Jesus rejected that. And Jesus refused to play respectability politics, where marginalized groups are expected to just shut up and conform to mainstream norms and behaviors in order to gain acceptance. Jesus knew that this was just another way for the dominant culture, in our case today, white conservative Christianity, so a way for that dominant culture to force conformity, to ignore cultural differences, and then unfairly blame victims for societal problems. And let's not forget that Paul, for all of his flaws, Paul pushed the early church toward inclusion, not exclusion. As we saw this week in our reading from the letter to the Romans, Paul was pushing them toward waking up, not shutting down. He was pushing them toward community, sharing, and cooperation. Now, compare that to the modern conservative Christian agenda. It is exclusive. We're in, everybody else is out. Those sinful heathen bastards. It is absolutely hierarchical. It's also punitive, right? Fire and brimstone, judgment and damnation. It is obsessed with control. The Seven Mountains Mandate is their belief that they are supposed to take dominion over 7 key areas of society: religion, family, education, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government. You heard that right. These conservative Christians want to control it all. Their agenda also centers on whiteness, maleness, and conformity. It punishes curiosity and difference. It worships certainty over compassion, and it prioritizes dominance over empathy. If anything, their agenda, the Christian conservative agenda at this day and age, their agenda is absolutely anti-Christian. At least if you define Christian by the teachings that are attributed to Jesus of Nazareth. Let me put this plainly. If your religion makes you smaller, harsher, angrier, less compassionate, and more afraid, it isn't helping you wake up. It's putting you to sleep. All right, let's pull this back to the individual level for a minute. As people interested in finding what's true, we need to acknowledge that wakefulness isn't political jargon. Conservatives may have hijacked and distorted what people think of the term woke, but the concept of wakefulness is not a culture war trophy, and it's not a trend. Wakefulness, awareness of what's really happening in the world around us, is the foundation for living a meaningful, values-based life. You cannot live your best life if you are unreflective, unexamined, unconscious, or if you're unaware of your values. In other words, you can't live your best life if you're going through that life on autopilot. You can't grow if you refuse to question the assumptions you've inherited. And you definitely can't build a better world if you're unwilling to see the world as it really is right now. Being woke in the human sense means noticing what you believe and understanding why you believe it. But it also means being willing and able to evaluate whether those beliefs are still good, and then choosing values that actually lead to human flourishing. That means being woke helps us to act intentionally instead of simply reacting automatically. That's it. That's the challenge. That's the wakefulness Paul was urging people to achieve. And that's the consciousness that Jesus allegedly modeled. Now, you might look at that and think, why are so many conservative Christians fighting so hard against wakefulness or being woke? It's so clearly a core Christian concept. Well, the answer is very sad and discouraging. You see, wakefulness requires you to truly see the people you've been taught to fear. It forces you to see them as human beings, which tends to cause a little empathy to kick in, which makes it hard to continue to dehumanize, hate, and oppress them. That also means that wakefulness forces you to confront injustice that you may have helped perpetuate. That's a scary thing for anybody to do. In other words, wakefulness demands discomfort, and it requires accountability. So it's just a lot easier to stay asleep and pretend that your bigotry and prejudice are holy. Okay, here's one more important point. The rules, dogmas, and hierarchies that dominate Christianity today were not handed down from heaven. They were created by men, created to build institutions, consolidate power, and control the behavior of all the believers. We know this for a fact. It's in the historical record, even if most Christians were never taught it or choose to ignore it. But the values, the foundational values that we can find reflected in the Christian Bible and almost every other religion or philosophy on earth, those foundational values existed long before religion, and they will exist long after. Cooperation, compassion, curiosity, fairness, integrity. These aren't Christian values. They aren't progressive values. They certainly aren't conservative values. These are foundational human values. The values that have allowed us to evolve and flourish as a species. You don't need divine authority to justify those values because they truly stand on their own merit. You only need awareness, wakefulness. And that brings us full circle. So here's the core truth of this episode of Afterthoughts. If Christians actually followed Paul's teaching about wakefulness, they would absolutely be the most woke people in the country. And Fox News would lose the majority of their audience, because wakefulness means seeing the world clearly. It means questioning your assumptions. It means examining your values and then re-examining them again. It means choosing compassion over religious dogma. It means leading with integrity instead of fear. If you reject all of that, you're not awake. You're asleep at the wheel. And that's a dangerous place to be. And if your religion encourages you to stay asleep, it isn't guiding you, it's sedating you. So the real question for all of us is simple. Are we willing to wake up? Are we willing to be conscious, reflective, intentional human beings? Are we willing to let our values shape our lives instead of letting our fears do that? Because anything less than being awake, being woke, isn't healthy. It isn't grounded. It isn't compassionate. And it certainly isn't Christian. The only way to live a values-based life is to wake up, to be woke in the original human sense of the word, because sleepwalking through your life with completely unexamined beliefs helps no one, least of all you. All right, thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and I'll also keep you updated on the weekly live streams of mythologizing the Bible. If you subscribe for free over at The Coda Project, you'll start receiving my publication called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because I include discussion questions designed for each age group. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to the Guide to Kitchen Table Activism, which is a detailed resource designed to help you be politically active from your own home. The guide explains why activism is important, the philosophy behind kitchen table activism, and the foundational values it supports, before laying out how to use the tools you have to make your voice heard. It provides tools, tactics, and templates for you to use, and it only takes 15 minutes a week. If you care about our democracy, our country, and our world, then I encourage you to check it out. While you're at it, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you'll start receiving my new upcoming newsletter called The Kitchen Table Activist. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.